I froze at the top of the basement stairs, my hand barely touching the light switch. The scream came again, muffled but unmistakable. My heart pounded as I stared down into the darkness where my own daughter had forbidden me to go. "Don't you dare step foot in the basement, Mom. It's private. You have no business down there," Melissa had said just yesterday, her voice cold as ice, eyes narrowed with warning. It was past midnight now. My daughter and son-in-law were supposedly at a work retreat for the weekend. Yet here I was, an uninvited guest in my own home, hearing sounds that made my blood run cold. I'd moved in with them 6 months ago after my stroke. "It'll be easier this way," Melissa had said. "We can take care of you." But their care had quickly turned to control. Areas of the house declared off-limits, my belongings mysteriously disappearing, my phone accidentally broken. Another cry echoed up the stairs, weaker this time, desperate. I tightened my grip on my cane and took the first step down. Whatever secret Melissa was keeping in our basement, I wasn't going to let fear stop me from discovering it. Not anymore. What I found at the bottom of those stairs would change everything forever, and not even my own daughter would be able to hide from the truth any longer. Melissa had always been my pride and joy. I raised her alone after her father walked out when she was just 5 years old. We didn't have much, but we had each other. I worked 2 jobs, receptionist at a clinic during the day and waitressing at night. My sister Martha would watch Melissa when I worked late. Every spare dollar went toward giving my daughter the opportunities I never had. "Mom, we got the scholarship," Melissa had shouted, bursting through our apartment door, waving the acceptance letter from Westlake University. I cried that night, happy tears. All the double shifts, all the missed sleep, it had been worth it. She met Richard in her final year of college, ambitious, well-dressed, from a good family, as he liked to remind us. He had plans, big plans, and Melissa was quickly swept up in them. "Richard's family has connections, Mom saw," she told me. "This is my chance to have the life we always dreamed about." I remembered watching her walk down the aisle 5 years ago, stunning in her white dress. Martha squeezed my hand and whispered, "You did good, sis. She's going to have everything now." At first, everything seemed perfect. They bought a beautiful 2-story house in the suburbs. Melissa landed a job at Richard's father's investment firm. Holiday dinners were filled with stories of promotions and vacations to places I'd only seen in magazines. "You should be proud," people told me. "Your daughter has really made something of herself." And I was proud, so proud that I ignored the subtle changes happening right before my eyes. The truth is, I gave everything for Melissa. When she needed braces at 12, I sold my mother's antique silver set, the only valuable thing I owned. When her school announced a trip to Washington, D.C., I picked up weekend cleaning jobs until I had the $800. For her senior prom, I worked overtime for 3 months to afford the designer dress she desperately wanted. "Everyone who matters will be looking at me," she said. I wanted her to fit in with her wealthier friends, to never feel less than. College was the biggest struggle. Even with her partial scholarship, the expenses were overwhelming. Textbooks, housing, meal plans. It never ended. I took out a second mortgage on our small house, the one I'd scraped and saved to buy when she was 10. "It's an investment in her future," I told Martha when she expressed concern. "She'll take care of me someday." When Melissa got engaged to Richard, I spent $15,000, nearly my entire retirement fund, to help with their dream wedding. "This is your big day," I said. "You deserve it to be perfect." Richard's parents contributed 3 times that amount, but still looked down their noses at my modest contribution. I overheard his mother at the reception. "Well, She gave what she could, I suppose. After the wedding, the requests didn't stop. Money for their house down payment, a loan when Richard wanted to buy into a partnership, always with promises to pay me back once things settled down. Then came my stroke last year. I was only 64, but suddenly couldn't manage on my own. The medical bills wiped out what little savings I had left. My house, the one I'd worked so hard for, had to be sold to cover the costs. "You'll move in with us," Melissa announced, not really asking. "It makes financial sense." I gave up everything: my independence, my community, my small garden that had brought me so much joy. All my belongings were either sold or packed into boxes that now sat untouched in their garage. "You should be grateful," Melissa said, whenever I questioned any of their decisions. "Do you know how many parents end up in nursing homes?" The total financial support I'd given them over the years easily surpassed $200,000. Money I would never see again, money that would have secured my own future. But I had given it freely, out of love, believing family took care of family. How wrong I had been. The first troubling sign came 3 months after I moved in. I was looking for a photo album in the hall closet when Melissa found me. "What are you doing going through our things?" she snapped, her face flushed with anger. "I was just looking for my old pictures," I explained, confused by her reaction. "You need to ask before you touch anything in this house," she said, taking the box from my hands. "We have a system." Then came the restrictions. I wasn't allowed to use the kitchen after 7 p.m. The den was off limits when Richard was home because he needed his space. My bedroom door was to remain open at all times in case I had another episode. My neighbor from my old neighborhood, Eleanor, called several times, but Melissa always said I was resting. When I mentioned wanting to invite Eleanor for coffee, Melissa frowned. "Mom, we've talked about this. Having strangers in our house is a security risk." "Eleanor isn't a stranger. She's been my friend for 20 years. "Well, Richard doesn't feel comfortable with it," she said, ending the discussion. One evening I overheard them talking in the kitchen. "How much longer do you think she'll be, you know?" Richard's voice drifted up the stairs. "The doctor said she could live another 10 years, Melissa answered, annoyance clear in her tone. "But we should be able to access her insurance policy before then." "We need to be careful," Richard warned. "Make sure everything's in order." That night I lay awake wondering what they meant. What insurance policy? I had nothing left except my monthly Social Security check that Melissa now managed to make things easier. The basement became the final boundary about a month ago. I had been doing well with my physical therapy, getting stronger. One morning, feeling restless, I thought I'd explore the house a bit more. The basement door was unlocked, and I was curious. I'd only made it halfway down the stairs when Melissa appeared, as if from nowhere. "What do you think you're doing?" Her voice was sharp, frightening. "Just looking around," I said, startled by her intensity. "The basement is absolutely off limits," she said, taking my arm and guiding me back up with unnecessary force. "It's damp down there, dangerous. You could fall. Besides, that's where we keep private family documents and Richard's work materials." That evening I heard the distinctive click of a lock being installed. By morning, the basement door had a shiny new deadbolt, and I never saw where they kept the key. Something wasn't right in my daughter's house, and whatever it was, the heart of the secret lay behind that locked basement door. After the basement incident, Melissa and Richard's behavior grew increasingly controlling. They installed a medical alert bracelet on my wrist that I couldn't remove, ostensibly for my safety, but it tracked my every movement through the house. "Dr. Wells thinks your memory might be slipping," Melissa told me one morning, referring to a doctor I'd never met. He suggested we start documenting your daily activities. Richard began coming home for lunch, supposedly to check on me, but he never asked how I was feeling. Instead, he inspected the house, looking for signs I'd been in places I shouldn't be. They changed the Wi-Fi password when I tried to email Martha. "The internet confuses you, Mom," Melissa explained, patting my hand like I was a child. "You got all mixed up last time and almost fell for a scam." My mail disappeared before I could read it. When I questioned this, Richard sighed heavily. "Your sister called. She thinks it's better if we manage your correspondence for now. The stress isn't good for your recovery." I hadn't spoken to Martha in weeks. Every time I asked to call her, there was an excuse. "She's traveling. She's busy with the grandkids. She'll call when she can." The worst part was when they started hosting dinner parties, introducing me to their friends as if I were already gone. "Mom used to be so independent," Melissa would say, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "The stroke changed everything. Some days she doesn't even recognize us." Richard would add, "We've discussed long-term care facilities, but family takes care of family, no matter how difficult." Their friends would nod approvingly, praising their sacrifice, while I sat there, perfectly lucid, treated like I was invisible. I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. Was I really forgetting things? Was I a burden they were nobly bearing? Then one night, I woke to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. Through narrowed eyes, I watched Richard slip inside, checking if I was asleep. Satisfied, he left, but not before I saw him pocket my reading glasses from the nightstand. The next morning, when I couldn't find them, Melissa sighed. "You're always misplacing things, Mom. This is exactly what we worry about." That's when I knew. They weren't caring for me. They were gaslighting me, isolating me, preparing for something. And whatever it was, it had something to do with that locked basement. The opportunity came 3 weeks later. Melissa and Richard announced they'd be attending a weekend conference in Chicago. "Mom, we've arranged for a home health aide to check on you Saturday morning," Melissa said. "Her name is Brenda. Don't open the door for anyone else." But Friday night, shortly after they left, I got a call on the house phone. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Brenda. I'm so sorry, but I've come down with the flu and won't be able to make it tomorrow. The agency will try to find a replacement, but it might be Monday before they can send someone." I thanked her, hung up, and smiled. For the first time in months, I would be completely alone. That night, I searched the house methodically, looking for the basement key. I checked drawers, coat pockets, even the freezer, a hiding place Melissa had used since childhood. Nothing. Disappointed but not defeated, I remembered something from my younger days. My first apartment had a similar door with a simple deadbolt. The maintenance man once showed me how to open it with a credit card when I got locked out. I found an old library card in my wallet, one of the few personal items Melissa hadn't organized away. After several attempts, and with hands shaking from both effort and anticipation, I heard the satisfying click as the lock gave way. The basement was pitch black. I fumbled for a light switch, my cane tapping tentatively on each stair as I descended. The first thing I noticed when the lights came on was how clean it was. No cobwebs, no dust. Not the hazardous environment Melissa had described. The space had been converted into a home office with filing cabinets, a desk with 2 computer monitors, and a large whiteboard covered with numbers and names. I approached the desk first. Stacks of papers sat in neat piles, each labeled with names I didn't recognize. The top folder read, "Patterson Estate Planning," my maiden name, not Melissa's married name. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside was a complete financial profile, but not of my meager assets. This showed accounts, properties, and investments worth millions of dollars, all bearing my name as the primary holder. Life insurance policies, trust documents, real estate deeds, bank statements, all with my signature, forged but convincing. Attached was a medical report diagnosing me with early-onset dementia, signed by the mysterious Dr. Wells. Another document granted Melissa and Richard power of attorney, also bearing my fabricated signature. I sank into the desk chair, stunned by the elaborate fraud. They had created a false fortune in my name and were positioning themselves to inherit it all upon my unfortunate decline. A noise from the corner of the basement made me jump, a soft moan like someone in pain. I turned and noticed a door I hadn't seen before, a small storage area under the stairs. It was padlocked, but the key hung on a nearby hook. My heart racing, I unlocked the door. Inside, curled on a makeshift bed of blankets, was a young woman. Her wrists were bound, her face bruised. She squinted in the sudden light, then gasped. "Help me," she whispered. "Please." I recognized her instantly, Jessica Winters, a local journalist whose disappearance had been on the news for the past 2 weeks. The reporter who had been investigating financial fraud targeting seniors. I helped Jessica into the main basement area, untying her restraints and giving her water from a bottle on the desk. Between sips, her story poured out. "I've been tracking a sophisticated elder fraud scheme for months," she explained, her voice hoarse. "Targeting wealthy seniors, isolating them from family, creating false financial identities to access loans and credit. Your daughter and son-in-law are at the center of it." Jessica had come to the house while they thought I was at a doctor's appointment. She'd told them she was investigating suspicious activity and wanted to ask some questions. They invited her in, offered her tea, and the next thing she knew, she woke up locked in the storage room. "They've been keeping me here, trying to find out what evidence I have and who else knows about it," she said. "They come down every day to interrogate me. They were planning to make it look like I'd disappeared permanently once they had what they needed." Hearing her story, pieces of my own situation fell into place. I wasn't the victim of just my daughter's greed. I was one player in a much larger criminal enterprise. "We need evidence," Jessica said, now more alert. "Photos, documents, recordings, anything that proves what they're doing." Despite my shaking hands, I managed to take pictures of the files with Jessica's phone, which they'd hidden in a desk drawer. We documented everything: the forged signatures, the fake medical reports, the financial statements. Jessica found a list of other victims, at least 7 names, all elderly, all showing similar patterns of isolation and financial exploitation. "This goes beyond just you and me," she said. "They're working with others, doctors who provide false diagnoses, lawyers who process fraudulent paperwork, caregivers who help isolate targets from their real families." As we gathered evidence, Jessica explained how these schemes typically worked. They identify seniors with some assets, manufacture estrangements from family members who might interfere, then create fictional wealth. They take out loans, open credit lines, even buy properties using the senior's identity. When they've extracted everything they can, the senior either dies under suspicious circumstances or gets committed to a facility with a convenient diagnosis of dementia. The realization hit me like physical pain. They never wanted to take care of me. They wanted to use me. Jessica squeezed my hand, and when they were done, they would have made sure you couldn't tell anyone what happened. We found a recorder in one of the drawers and turned it on, documenting our findings and Jessica's testimony about her kidnapping. We photographed her injuries and the makeshift prison where she'd been held. "What do we do now?" I asked, overwhelmed by the scope of their crimes. Jessica thought for a moment. "We can't just go to the police with what we have. Richard's brother is a detective. I learned that during my investigation. We need more. We need them to incriminate themselves." She looked at me intently. "They'll be back Sunday night. Are you willing to help me set a trap?" I thought of all the years I'd loved Melissa, all the sacrifices, all the trust. I thought of how completely that trust had been betrayed. "Yes," I said firmly. "It's time they learned who they're really dealing with." After helping Jessica clean up and ensuring she had water and food, we agreed she would return to the storage room. "If they discover you've found me, they'll run," she explained. "We need them to think everything is normal until we can trap them." I reluctantly locked her back in, promising to check on her when it was safe. Then I carefully restored the basement to its original condition, making sure nothing looked disturbed. Over the next day and a half, I prepared. I found my old recorder, a small device I'd used for grocery lists before my stroke, hidden in a box of worthless junk Melissa had stashed in my closet. I tested it, pleased to discover it still worked. Sunday evening arrived with the sound of the garage door opening. I sat in the living room pretending to watch television, my heart pounding but my face calm. "Mom, we're home," Melissa called cheerfully. "Did you have a nice weekend?" "Very quiet," I replied. "How was the conference?" Richard set down their luggage. "Productive. Very productive." He exchanged a meaningful look with Melissa. "Brenda couldn't make it yesterday," I mentioned casually. "She called to say she was sick." Melissa froze for just a second. "That's strange. She didn't call us." "Maybe she didn't want to disturb your conference," I suggested, watching their reaction. Richard's smile tightened. "So, you were alone all weekend? Did you manage okay?" "I mostly stayed in my room," I lied. "Watched TV. You know how tired I get." They seemed satisfied with my answer, but I noticed them both glancing toward the basement door, checking that it was still locked. After dinner, I excused myself to go to bed early. Instead, I activated my recorder and carefully positioned it in my robe pocket. Then I made my way slowly to the kitchen for a glass of water, timing my arrival just as Melissa and Richard were whispering together. "Check on her tonight?" Melissa was saying. "I will. Make sure she hasn't been snooping around," Richard replied. "And I'll take some food down to our guest. She's getting weaker. We need to wrap this up soon." I deliberately made a noise, causing them to jump apart guiltily. "Mom, I thought you were in bed," Melissa said, her voice unnaturally high. "Just needed some water," I mumbled, playing the confused elder. "I thought I heard you say something about a guest?" "You must have misheard," Richard said smoothly. "We were discussing a pest problem. Mice in the basement. Nothing for you to worry about." I nodded vaguely. "The basement. You know, I was thinking about the basement today. There's something familiar about it." Melissa and Richard exchanged alarmed glances. "What do you mean, Mom?" Melissa asked, her voice tight. I put on my most confused expression. "I had the strangest feeling I've been down there recently. Isn't that odd? Since you've told me it's off limits. Maybe I dreamed it." Richard approached, his manner suddenly solicitous. "Catherine, remember what Dr. Wells said about confusing dreams with reality? This is exactly why we're concerned about you being alone." Melissa touched my arm, her fingers digging in slightly. "Let's get you to bed, Mom. You're obviously tired." As they guided me back to my room, I heard Richard whisper to Melissa, "Check the basement lock. Now." I got into bed fully dressed and pretended to fall asleep quickly. Through barely open eyes, I saw Melissa check on me before closing my door. Minutes later, I heard urgent whispers in the hallway. "The lock looks fine," Melissa hissed. "Check the storage room too," Richard insisted. "Make sure our guest is secure." I waited until their footsteps descended the basement stairs before slipping out of bed. With my ear pressed to the floor vent, I could hear their conversation from below. "She's still here. Looks weaker, though," Melissa reported. "We need to move up our timeline," Richard said. "Your mother's starting to have moments of clarity. If she remembers anything or starts asking questions, she won't," Melissa interrupted. "I doubled her medication tonight. By tomorrow, she'll be completely disoriented. We'll call Dr. Wells, have him document another episode. After that, we can move her to Peaceful Valley." "Good. Once she's institutionalized, we can finalize everything. The power of attorney is already in place. We just need to liquidate the fake assets and disappear before anyone connects the dots." Their voices moved away, but I'd heard enough. I crawled back to my bed, my body shaking with fear and rage. They weren't just planning to steal from me. They were planning to drug me, declare me incompetent, and lock me away forever. And poor Jessica. They'd mentioned she was getting weaker. We had to move fast. The next morning, I pretended to be groggy from the extra medication they'd slipped into my evening tea. Melissa seemed pleased by my confusion, helping me to the dining room with exaggerated patience. "Richard had to go into work early today," she explained, setting a bowl of oatmeal in front of me. "But he's arranged for Dr. Wells to come by this afternoon for a checkup." I nodded vaguely, pushing the food around while secretly depositing it into my napkin when she turned away. I wasn't going to consume anything else they gave me. "I think I'll rest in my room until then," I said, making my voice feeble. "Good idea, Mom." Melissa's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'll bring your lunch tray up later." As soon as I was alone, I implemented the plan Jessica and I had developed. I called Martha from the landline in my room, a phone they'd left connected because it showed on caller ID who I was speaking with. "Martha, it's Catherine," I said when she answered. "I need your help." "Kat, I've been trying to reach you for weeks." Martha's voice was frantic. "Melissa keeps saying you can't come to the phone." "Listen carefully," I said urgently. "I don't have much time. Melissa and Richard are planning to have me committed. They've been forging documents, creating false financial records in my name. There's a reporter named Jessica Winters locked in their basement, the one who's been missing. I need you to call the police, but not the local precinct. Richard's brother works there. Call the state police." "Oh my God," Martha gasped. "Are you sure?" "Completely sure. And Martha, tell them to hurry." After hanging up, I sent a text from my room phone to Jessica's phone number. "Help coming. Be ready." Then I made my way downstairs, moving as silently as my cane would allow. I could hear Melissa in the basement, her voice harsh, as she questioned Jessica about her investigation. I stood at the top of the basement stairs, gathering my courage. Then I called out, my voice stronger than it had been in months. "Melissa, I need to speak with you, now." Her footsteps pounded up the stairs. When she emerged, her face was flushed with anger that quickly transformed into forced concern. "Mom, you should be resting. What are you doing up?" "I remembered something," I said, meeting her gaze directly. "About the basement. About Jessica Winters." All pretense disappeared from her face. "You're confused again. There's no one in our basement." "I heard you talking to her just now," I replied. "I know everything, Melissa. The fake financial records, the plan to have me committed, all of it." She stepped toward me, her expression hardening. "You have no idea what you're talking about. This is exactly why you need professional care." "I called Martha," I said, watching her face pale. "She's contacting the state police right now." Melissa lunged forward suddenly, grabbing my shoulders. "What have you done? Do you have any idea what you've just ruined?" Her fingers dug painfully into my flesh. "Everything I've worked for, everything we've built. You're going to destroy it all because you couldn't just take your medication and be grateful?" "Grateful?" I repeated, my voice rising. "For being drugged? For being stolen from? For being treated like a prisoner in my daughter's house?" "You were nothing before us," she shouted, her mask completely gone now. "Living in that tiny house with your pathetic little life. We gave you purpose. We took care of you." "You used me," I corrected her, "just like you've used others. How many seniors have you and Richard targeted? How many families have you destroyed?" Something in her snapped. With a strength born of desperation, she shoved me backward. I lost my balance, my cane clattering to the floor as I fell against the wall. "You stupid old woman," she hissed, looming over me. "You have no proof. It's your word against ours. Who do you think they'll believe? The respected financial advisor and his wife, or the confused stroke victim with dementia?" From behind her, a voice spoke clearly. "They'll believe the evidence." Melissa whirled around to find Jessica standing at the top of the basement stairs, holding her phone. "I've been recording everything you just said." The front door burst open at that moment, revealing Martha with 2 state troopers behind her. "That's her," Martha said, pointing at Melissa. "And my sister's on the floor. She's hurt." As the officers rushed in, Melissa backed away, her face contorted with rage and fear. "This is all a misunderstanding," she began, her voice suddenly sweet again. "My mother is confused. She has dementia." "Save it," one officer interrupted, already reading her rights. "We have a warrant to search these premises based on evidence of kidnapping, elder abuse, and fraud." The second trooper helped me to my feet. "Are you all right, ma'am?" I looked at my daughter, this stranger wearing Melissa's face, as handcuffs were placed on her wrists. "I am now," I said quietly. "I am now." The days following Melissa and Richard's arrest were a whirlwind of police interviews, medical examinations, and meetings with fraud investigators. Jessica was hospitalized briefly for dehydration and minor injuries, but recovered quickly. Martha stayed with me at a hotel. I refused to remain in that house a moment longer than necessary. "I can't believe they did this to you," Martha kept saying, her eyes filling with tears. "All those times Melissa told me you couldn't talk, that you were confused or sleeping. I should have pushed harder." "You couldn't have known," I assured her. "They were very convincing. That's how they operated." A week after the arrests, I met with Agent Larson from the FBI's Elder Fraud Division. She spread documents across the hotel table, the evidence collected from Melissa and Richard's basement office. "Mrs. Patterson, what your daughter and son-in-law were involved in wasn't just ordinary fraud," she explained. "They were part of a sophisticated ring targeting seniors across 3 states. We've been investigating for over a year." She showed me profiles of other victims. Some had lost everything. Some had died under suspicious circumstances. Some, like me, had been systematically isolated and gaslighted, prepared for convenient ends. "The scheme was elaborate," Agent Larson continued. "They created fictional wealth in their victims' names, taking out loans, opening credit accounts, even purchasing properties through shell companies. Then they'd drain those resources, leaving their victims with nothing but debt." I shook my head, still struggling to comprehend the scope. "But I don't understand. I had so little to begin with. Why target me?" Agent Larson's expression softened. "You weren't chosen for what you had, Mrs. Patterson. You were chosen for who you were, someone isolated, someone trusting, and—" She hesitated. "Someone whose daughter was already involved in the scheme. That truth, that Melissa had deliberately selected me as a victim, was almost more than I could bear. "There's something else you should know," Agent Larson continued. "When we examined the financial records, we discovered something unexpected." She slid a folder toward me. Inside was a statement from an account I'd never seen before. "This is a trust in your name, a legitimate one, not part of their fraud. It was established nearly 40 years ago by your ex-husband, David Patterson." I stared at the statement in shock. "That's impossible. David left us with nothing." "According to the documentation, he established this trust shortly after he left, with instructions that you were never to be told about it. It seems he made some successful investments and felt guilty about abandoning you and Melissa. He died 15 years ago, and the trust has been accumulating interest ever since." The balance showed over $1.2 million. The trust was set to release to you upon your 65th birthday, Agent Larson explained. Somehow, Melissa discovered its existence while working at the investment firm. That's likely what drew Richard's attention to her in the first place. They planned to gain control of the trust when it released to you. I sat back, overwhelmed. All these years of struggle, of sacrifice. All the times I'd worked multiple jobs to support Melissa, and her father, the man I'd cursed for decades, had actually provided for us, in his own flawed way. "What happens now?" I asked finally. "The trust is yours, Mrs. Patterson, completely legitimate and untouched by their fraud. As for Melissa and Richard, they're facing multiple federal charges. With Jessica's testimony and the evidence we found, they'll likely be in prison for a very long time." Later that evening, as Martha and I sat in the hotel room processing everything, the phone rang. It was Jessica. "Catherine," she said warmly, "I wanted you to know my editor has approved a major investigative piece on elder fraud, featuring your story if you're willing to share it." "Will it help other seniors avoid what happened to me?" I asked. "That's my hope," Jessica replied. "Your courage could save countless others." I thought for a moment about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, fearful, isolated, doubting my own mind, and I thought about the woman I was becoming, stronger, wiser, suddenly wealthy beyond anything I'd imagined. "Tell your story," Martha encouraged, squeezing my hand. "Help others." I nodded. "I'll do it, Jessica. It's time people knew the truth." The preliminary hearing was set for a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the arrests. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters. Jessica's story had broken the previous week, exposing the fraud ring and turning the case into national news. I walked slowly but deliberately up those steps, Martha on one side and Agent Larson on the other. Behind us came 5 other families, victims and relatives of victims from Melissa and Richard's scheme. Some used walkers or canes. One elderly man was in a wheelchair, pushed by his adult son. Together we formed a small army of the wounded but undefeated. Eleanor, my old neighbor, had driven 3 hours to be there. "I knew something was wrong when they wouldn't let me speak to you," she said, hugging me tightly. "I should have pushed harder." "You're here now," I assured her. "That's what matters." Inside the courtroom, I saw my daughter for the first time since her arrest. Seated beside Richard in an orange jumpsuit, she looked smaller somehow, diminished. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away. Richard stared straight ahead, his once confident posture now slumped and defeated. Their defense attorney, a sleek, expensive-looking man in a tailored suit, approached before the proceedings began. "Mrs. Patterson," he said quietly, "my clients would like to discuss a plea arrangement. They're prepared to provide information about others involved in exchange for leniency." Agent Larson stepped forward protectively. Any discussions should go through the prosecutor's office. Of course, he nodded with practiced smoothness. But I thought Mrs. Patterson should know they're willing to cooperate. Family is still family, after all. I looked at him steadily, feeling a calm I wouldn't have thought possible months ago. They stopped being my family the moment they decided to exploit my trust. Tell them I said no deals. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Diane Reeves, had prepared meticulously. She outlined the charges: kidnapping, elder abuse, fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, false imprisonment, and attempted murder. The last charge stemming from the fact that they had been slowly poisoning me with excessive medication. "Your Honor," Ms. Reeves said, her voice carrying through the packed courtroom, "this case represents one of the most egregious examples of elder exploitation I've encountered in my 15 years as a prosecutor. The defendants didn't just steal Mrs. Patterson's assets. They stole her autonomy, her dignity, and very nearly her life." The judge, a silver-haired woman in her 60s, listened intently, occasionally glancing at me with compassionate eyes. When it was the defense's turn, their strategy became clear immediately. My clients were acting out of concern for Mrs. Patterson's declining mental health, the attorney argued smoothly. They may have exercised poor judgment in some instances, but their intentions were to protect a beloved mother and mother-in-law suffering from dementia. I felt Martha stiffen beside me at the blatant lie. The hearing proceeded. Melissa and Richard entered not guilty pleas despite the overwhelming evidence against them. Bail was denied due to the flight risk and the seriousness of the charges. As they were led away, Melissa turned toward me suddenly. "Mom," she called out, her voice breaking. "Please, you know I love you. This is all a misunderstanding." The courtroom fell silent. All eyes turned to me. I rose to my feet, supported by my cane, no longer a symbol of weakness, but of the strength it took to stand on my own. "You didn't love me, Melissa," I said, my voice clear and carrying in the quiet room. "You saw me as a resource to be used and discarded. That isn't love. It's exploitation, and it ends today." Over the next 2 months, the prosecution built its case meticulously. Jessica was the star witness, recounting her investigation, kidnapping, and discovery in vivid detail that left the courtroom silent and horrified. "I was researching a pattern of elder fraud cases," she testified, "when I noticed similarities across 3 states, the same techniques, the same isolation patterns, even the same doctors signing questionable competency evaluations." She described how her investigation led her to Richard's investment firm and eventually to their home. "They offered me tea," she recalled. "The next thing I remember was waking up in that storage room, bound and terrified. Dr. Wells, the physician who had supposedly diagnosed my dementia, was arrested after the FBI discovered he had signed similar diagnoses for 7 other elderly victims. He quickly turned state's evidence, admitting he had never examined me or any of the other supposed patients. It was a straightforward arrangement," he testified nervously. "They paid me $5,000 per case to sign pre-written medical evaluations. I never thought anyone would get hurt." The courtroom erupted at that statement, forcing the judge to call for order. Perhaps the most damning testimony came from Richard's former assistant, Megan. She described overhearing conversations about the Patterson Project and being instructed to process paperwork with my forged signatures. "Mr. Henderson told me it was just helping his mother-in-law organize her finances," she said, voice trembling. When I questioned some discrepancies, he said his wife had power of attorney and everything was above board. Then came my turn to testify. As I took the stand, I felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about Melissa and Richard anymore. It was about every vulnerable senior who had ever been manipulated or exploited. For 2 hours, I detailed the systematic campaign of isolation, gaslighting, and abuse. I described how they had slowly convinced me I was losing my mind, how they had cut me off from friends and family, how they had controlled every aspect of my life. "Did you ever suspect your daughter might be targeting you as part of a fraud scheme?" Ms. Reeves asked. I took a deep breath. No, that was the last thing I would have ever imagined. This was my daughter, the little girl I had raised alone, the child I had sacrificed everything for. I trusted her completely. That trust made me the perfect victim. The defense attorney's cross-examination was aggressive. He questioned my memory, suggested I had been confused about normal caregiving activities, and implied I was exaggerating out of resentment. "Isn't it possible, Mrs. Patterson, that you misinterpreted your daughter's protective measures as controlling behavior?" he asked, his tone condescending. "Is locking someone in their room protective?" I countered. "Is drugging them without their knowledge protective? Is keeping a kidnapped journalist in your basement protective?" The jury's expressions told me all I needed to know. The most powerful moment came when the prosecution played recordings found on Richard's phone, conversations between him and Melissa discussing their plans for me. "Once the old lady is declared incompetent, we liquidate everything," Richard's voice echoed through the courtroom. "The nursing home will cost about $8,000 a month, but we'll have access to over $1 million once we consolidate the accounts." Melissa's voice followed, chillingly casual. "Make sure we use Peaceful Valley. They don't ask questions as long as the check's clear. 3 months there and she'll either give up or nature will take its course." I watched my daughter's face crumple as her own words condemned her. Richard stared at the floor, shoulders slumped in defeat. On the final day of testimony, a financial crimes expert laid out the full scope of their operation. 27 identified victims across 3 states, over $4.2 million in stolen assets, and at least 4 suspicious deaths that were being reinvestigated in light of the new evidence. The defense's closing arguments focused on creating reasonable doubt, suggesting that while Richard might have been involved in financial improprieties, Melissa was merely following her husband's lead, unaware of the full extent of his crimes. "Mrs. Henderson believed she was acting in her mother's best interests," the attorney insisted. "She may have used poor judgment, but that doesn't make her a criminal." The prosecutor's closing was brief, but powerful. She simply displayed a large photograph of Jessica in the storage room, followed by images of the forged documents, the medication they had been giving me, and finally, a picture of me on the day I was found after the rescue. "This is not poor judgment," she said quietly. "This is calculated, systematic elder abuse and exploitation. This is predatory behavior at its most cruel, targeting those who are vulnerable, isolated, and trusting. The defendants didn't just steal money, they stole dignity, they stole independence, they stole peace of mind, and they were willing to steal lives to cover their tracks." The jury deliberated for just under 4 hours. When they returned, the foreperson, a retired school teacher about my age, stood tall as she delivered the verdict. "On all counts against both defendants, we find them guilty." A collective gasp went through the courtroom, followed by muffled sobs from behind me. Melissa's in-laws, I assumed, coming to terms with what their son and daughter-in-law had done. The sentencing hearing a week later was standing room only. Victim impact statements were read, including several from family members of elderly victims who had died during or after the fraud, never knowing justice would eventually come. My father died believing he had been a burden, One woman testified through tears. His last words to me were an apology for not leaving me more. He never knew they had stolen everything. When it was my turn, I stood slowly, facing the judge rather than looking at Melissa. Your Honor, I raised my daughter alone, working multiple jobs to give her opportunities I never had. I sold my wedding ring to pay for her college. I went without meals so she could have what she needed. I believed love meant sacrifice, and I sacrificed willingly. I paused, steadying myself. I don't share this for sympathy, but to show the depth of betrayal involved. What hurts most isn't the financial exploitation, or even the attempts to have me declared incompetent. It's knowing that the child I gave everything foresaw me as nothing more than a resource to be used up and discarded. The courtroom was silent as I continued. However, I stand here today not broken, but rebuilt, stronger, wiser, and determined that what happened to me will help protect others. I ask the court to impose a sentence that reflects not just the damage done to me, but the danger these individuals pose to vulnerable seniors everywhere. The judge nodded solemnly. She turned to Melissa and Richard, who had been given an opportunity to speak before sentencing. Richard, pragmatic to the end, simply apologized and asked for mercy in light of his cooperation. Melissa stood, visibly shaking. "Mom," she began, her voice breaking. "I know you won't believe me, but I did love you. Things just got out of control. What started as helping manage your finances turned into this. I never meant for it to go so far." The judge's expression remained impassive. "Mrs. Henderson, the evidence suggests otherwise. This was not a situation that got out of control. This was a calculated long-term scheme targeting not just your mother, but numerous vulnerable individuals." She delivered the sentences with unwavering clarity. 25 years for Melissa, 18 for Richard due to his cooperation. No possibility of parole for at least 15 years. The methodical exploitation of society's most vulnerable members represents a profound betrayal of the social contract, the judge declared. The defendants not only stole money and property, but dignity, autonomy, and trust. Their crimes strike at the very foundation of family bonds and social trust. As they were led away, Melissa looked back one last time. Our eyes met briefly. In hers, I saw something I couldn't quite name. Regret, perhaps, or simply the realization of all she had lost. Then she was gone, disappearing through the door to begin her long sentence. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded around us. Jessica, now back at work, stepped forward. "Mrs. Patterson, would you like to make a statement about today's proceedings?" I nodded, taking the microphone offered. "Today isn't just about my daughter and son-in-law. It's about a system that allows predators to target vulnerable seniors. It's about the shame that keeps victims silent. And it's about the courage it takes to speak up, even when the person hurting you is someone you love." I paused, looking directly into the cameras. To anyone watching who feels isolated, who's being told they're confused or forgetful when they know they're not, who's being separated from friends and family, trust yourself. What you're experiencing might not be age, it might be abuse, and help is available. As Martha guided me back to the car, an elderly woman broke through the crowd and touched my arm. "Thank you," she whispered. "My son has been doing the same things to me. After seeing you today, I'm going to call my other children tonight." In that moment, despite everything I'd lost, I felt something unexpected, purpose. The trial lasted 3 weeks. One by one, victims or their surviving family members testified about the manipulation, isolation, and fraud they'd experienced. Medical experts explained how Melissa and Richard had used medication to induce symptoms of dementia. Financial investigators detailed the complex web of fake accounts and forged documents. Throughout the proceedings, I sat tall in the courtroom, often catching Melissa's gaze across the room. Sometimes I saw anger there, sometimes fear, and occasionally, when she thought no one was looking, profound regret. I wondered which emotion was real, or if they all were, layers of the daughter I thought I knew. "Do you hate her?" a reporter asked me outside the courthouse one day. "No," I answered truthfully. "I hate what she did. I hate the choices she made. But she's still my daughter, and that's the most painful part of all this." Richard broke first, accepting a plea deal in exchange for testimony against others in the fraud ring, including several doctors and lawyers. His testimony revealed the shocking scope of their operation. At least 27 victims across 3 states over 5 years. Many had lost their homes, their savings, even their dignity. Some had died believing they were burdens to their families. Melissa maintained her innocence until the end, even as the evidence mounted overwhelmingly against her. On the final day of testimony, she took the stand in her own defense. "I loved my mother," she insisted, tears streaming down her face. "Everything I did was to protect her." The prosecutor approached calmly. "Mrs. Henderson, if you loved your mother so much, why did we find this recorded on your home computer?" He played an audio clip from a conversation between Melissa and Richard that the FBI had recovered from their hard drive. "Once Mom's committed, we'll have complete access," Melissa's voice echoed through the courtroom. 3 months max, and we'll be done with her for good." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. The verdict came back unanimous, guilty on all counts. Melissa received 25 years. Richard, because of his cooperation, got 18. The judge, an older woman herself, delivered a scathing statement during sentencing. "The methodical exploitation of society's most vulnerable members represents a profound betrayal of the social contract," she declared. "The defendants not only stole money and property, but dignity, autonomy, and trust. Their crimes were not merely financial, they were crimes against humanity itself." As they led Melissa away, she called out to me one last time, "Mom, please, I'm sorry." I didn't respond. There would be time for that conversation later, if I ever chose to have it. After the sentencing, I declined to attend the press conference. Instead, Martha and I visited the cemetery where my ex-husband was buried, a place I'd never been before. Despite our bitter divorce and his abandonment, I felt a strange need for closure with David, too. The headstone was simple. David Patterson, 1943-2010, father and provider. I placed a small stone on top, a tradition I'd learned from a Jewish friend years ago. "I wish you'd told me about the trust," I said quietly. "It would have made raising her so much easier. But I understand why you didn't. You knew I would have spent it all on her." Martha waited patiently as I said my final goodbye to the man I'd both loved and hated for most of my life. "What will you do now?" she asked as we walked back to the car. "With the money, I mean." I'd given this considerable thought over the past months. "First, I'm buying my own place, something small but nice with a garden. I want to grow tomatoes again." Martha smiled. "That sounds perfect." "And I'm establishing a foundation," I continued, "the Catherine Patterson Elder Protection Fund. Jessica's going to help me set it up. We'll provide resources for seniors at risk, education about financial exploitation, and legal support for victims." "Kat, that's wonderful," Martha said, squeezing my hand. "I've spent my whole life taking care of others," I said. "First David, then Melissa, always putting their needs first. Now I get to choose how I want to live these last chapters, and I choose to help others like me. But I'm also going to finally live a little." The settlement from the fraud case brought additional funds. The FBI had been able to recover some of the stolen assets from the fraud ring's accounts, which were distributed among the victims. Additionally, I received a victim's compensation award and a settlement from the bank that had processed many of the fraudulent transactions. Within 2 months, I closed on a lovely one-bedroom condo overlooking the river in a community designed for active seniors. I filled it with plants, books, and a few cherished possessions I managed to recover from Melissa's house. I took art classes, joined a book club, and even signed up for ballroom dancing lessons, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. Martha visited often, sometimes staying for weeks at a time. "You seem different," she remarked one evening as we shared a bottle of wine on my balcony. "Lighter somehow." "I am," I replied. "For the first time in my life, I'm not responsible for anyone else. It's just me, making my own choices." 6 months after the trial, I stood in the community room of the Riverwood Senior Center, facing an audience of attentive faces. My new home was just a short walk away. Elder fraud doesn't just happen to the wealthy or the isolated, I explained to the group. It can happen to anyone, and the warning signs aren't always obvious. For the past 3 months, I'd been conducting these workshops twice a week, sharing my story and teaching others how to protect themselves. What had begun as small gatherings had grown to standing room-only events, with seniors bringing friends and family members. The Catherine Patterson Elder Protection Fund had already assisted 15 seniors in potentially exploitative situations, providing legal counsel, financial advisors, and emotional support. We'd helped 3 elderly men and women regain control of their finances from predatory caregivers and family members. 2 local police departments had invited me to help train their officers in recognizing signs of elder abuse and financial exploitation. A state senator had reached out about potential legislation to protect vulnerable seniors. The work was meaningful, important, and healing in ways I'd never anticipated. Jessica sat in the back of today's workshop, smiling encouragingly. Her investigative series had won a national award, and we'd become close friends. She'd just finished a book about the case, with a portion of the proceeds going to the foundation. "You've turned your pain into purpose," she told me over lunch the week before. "It's inspiring." After the presentation, an elegantly dressed gentleman approached. "Mrs. Patterson, that was incredibly informative. I wish I'd heard a talk like this years ago. My mother might still be with us." He introduced himself as Dr. James Wilson, a retired physician. "Would you consider joining me for coffee sometime?" he asked. "I volunteer with a senior advocacy group that could really use your expertise." I found myself blushing slightly. I'd like that very much. Later that evening, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset. Martha called, as she did every day. "How was today's workshop?" she asked. "Powerful," I replied. "A woman realized her caregiver has been stealing from her. The center director is helping her file a police report tomorrow. You're changing lives, Kat." "And mine has changed too," I said, watching the pink and orange clouds reflect on the river's surface. I never thought I'd say this, but in some ways, what happened was a gift. It showed me my own strength. It gave me purpose. "Are you going to visit her?" Martha asked quietly. We both knew she meant Melissa. I received letters from her every week, some apologetic, some angry, some pleading. I had read none of them yet. They sat in a drawer, waiting for a day when I might be ready. "Not yet," I answered honestly. "Maybe someday. But right now I'm focused on healing, on building something positive from all this pain." Last week, I'd received a call from Melissa's prison counselor. "Your daughter has agreed to participate in a restorative justice program," she explained. "If you're ever willing, She'd like to make amends. I told her I would consider it, and I meant it. Forgiveness wasn't something I could force, but neither was it something I would rule out forever. Some days the wound still felt fresh. Other days I could see beyond the betrayal to the complex woman my daughter had become. In the meantime, I was building a new life. Next month, I would travel to Europe for the first time. A 3-week tour of gardens in England and France. Dr. Wilson had asked me to dinner twice now, and his companionship was becoming something I looked forward to with surprising eagerness. The foundation was expanding its reach, with 2 new staff members and partnerships with 3 legal aid organizations. As we talked, I opened the letter that had arrived that morning, a thank you note from Jessica's editor. Enclosed was the final copy of next Sunday's magazine, featuring our story on the cover. Breaking the Silence: How One Woman's Courage Exposed an Elder Fraud Ring and Saved Countless Others. I ran my fingers over the glossy cover. The woman in the photo, standing tall with her cane, face resolute, barely resembled the frightened, doubtful person I'd been a year ago. "You know what I've learned through all this, Martha?" I said, still looking at the magazine. "Our worst moments don't define us. What we choose to do afterward does." After we hung up, I opened my journal, a habit I'd started at my therapist's suggestion. Each night, I wrote down one thing I was grateful for, one challenge I'd faced, and one goal for tomorrow. Tonight I wrote, grateful for the strength I never knew I had until I needed it. Challenge: remembering that forgiveness is a journey, not a destination. Tomorrow's goal: call Dr. Wilson about that coffee. I closed the journal and looked out at the stars appearing one by one above the river. For the first time in longer than I could remember, the future held not fear, but possibility. The basement that had held such darkness had ultimately led me into the light. You deserve respect at any age. Family doesn't mean accepting abuse. Sometimes putting yourself first isn't selfish, it's survival. And standing up for yourself isn't just your right. It might save someone else too. If this story resonates with you, please remember: trust your instincts. Question isolation. Seek help from professionals who specialize in elder abuse and fraud. Your voice matters, your experience is valid, and you are never too old to start again. Keep your dignity even when hurt. Your worth isn't determined by those who fail to see it.